Today we're looking at DNA and the human genome. So what is it that you need to know? Well, you need to know that DNA is the material of inheritance and some of the characteristics of DNA, how it looks. You need to know what a genome is, and you need to know about why we are interested in the human genome. What can knowing about that do for us? So the thing to remember is that in flowering plants and in animals, you always have chromosomes that come in pairs because they've received one from mum and one from dad. But I can hear you think, well, are there any plants that don't flower? Well, there are. Ferns and conifers are classic examples, and they're actually really important to us. The use of fuel, the use of medicine, landscaping, lumber, cutting down wood to build things. So they've got lots and lots of uses. So we certainly can't discount them. But they don't have chromosomes that come in pairs. They have single chromosomes. So when we're talking about chromosomes at GCSE, all we need to consider is chromosomes that come in pairs. This is an image that you will have seen lots of. It is DNA. DNA is a chemical, and it's called deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a really long chemical, and it's the stuff that chromosomes are made of. So a little bit like, let's imagine a chromosome is like a ladder, and a ladder is made out of wood. So the DNA is the wood of the ladder. The DNA is the material the chromosome is made out of. And it appears in two strands. Each chromosome is made of two strands of DNA, and they are twisted together into a shape called a helix. It goes round and round and round. It's also a polymer. What do we mean by that? A long chain of repeating units. So if I just show you here, this is one unit of DNA. It is a nucleotide. So here's one, here's the other, here's the other, and here's the other. And on the other side, we've got exactly the same thing. So this is one strand, and this is another strand of nucleotides, a polymer of nucleotides. Together they interact, and then that gets twisted, and that is your chromosome. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is that the strands actually run in opposite directions. Here you can see that these sugar shapes here, this pentagon is going up this way, and on this side it's going down the other way. When you get to A level, you learn about that in more detail. But basically, you've got two strands, it's a polymer, and they twist together to form what we call a double helix. Now, a small section of that chromosome will make a gene. And you have genes for eye colour, you have genes for whether you can roll your tongue or not. You have genes for your earlobe attaching, all the things. You have a gene to make an enzyme, you have a gene to make a hormone. And so each section of a chromosome is a gene, and that is a code. Just like a recipe book is the code to make a cake. The gene is the code to make a protein in your body. So as we've said, a gene is a code for a protein. It is made from DNA. Each chromosome contains thousands of genes, and each gene is used to make a protein, which could be an enzyme or a hormone or a pigment. For example, the pigment in your eyes that gives you your eye colour. So when we talk about the human genome, what do we mean? Well, we mean all the DNA in our chromosomes. And the Human DNA Project tried to work out what all the DNA was for. It tried to work out what all the genes were, where they were located, and what they did. It was a project that used scientists all over the world they collaborated, and this is where scientific language becomes really important, because you're dealing with people in different countries that speak different languages. When they set out to do the Human Genome Project to map all of the genes, they thought it was going to take a really long amount of time, because the technology back in the day wasn't very good. But advances have really happened quite quickly in this field, and so actually in the end the whole project finished ahead of time and within budget. So in 2003 the job was done, and what scientists have now turned their attention to is mapping genomes of other organisms. Now, one of the interesting things is that you don't just contain DNA in your nucleus, you contain DNA in your mitochondria. Remember, all your cells have mitochondria. That is the site of respiration, and all cells respire. So some cells that are more active than others have more mitochondria than other cells. So things like a muscle cell, for example, will have a lot more mitochondria than a fat cell in your body. A liver cell, the liver is a very active organ, will have a lot of mitochondria in there compared to a skin cell, because it's a lot more metabolically active, there's more reactions going on. Now, in the mitochondria, as it's the site of respiration, sometimes you need to make enzymes very, very quickly because your respiratory rates are increasing. So because of that, what we do is we've got some DNA in there so we can quickly make the enzymes necessary, and they're in the right place, they're in the mitochondria, they're there, made, available for respiration to take place straight away. Now, it's your mother who gave you these genes, your mother who put your DNA in your mitochondria, and so that's actually quite an interesting fact, and later, again, at A level, you'll learn a lot more about that. So, all the DNA in a human is the human genome, that's what we mean. It includes the DNA in the nucleus and the DNA in your mitochondria. Your mum gave you that, you can thank your mum. Now, we have 21,000 genes. That's amazing, that's massive. That's like having a recipe book with 21,000 recipes. We must be so clever, we must be so top of the food chain, we are it. Well, until you begin to realise that actually a mouse has got 23,000, a flea has got 31,000. What's going on? The thing to remember is that not all of your genes are switched on. Some of them are switched on, some of them are switched off. We can turn some on and we can turn some off. And those that are turned off permanently are basically junk DNA. So what has the Human Genome Project taught us? It's taught us that although we do have 21,000 genes, not all of them are active. A little bit like your recipe book. In your recipe book, you might make 50% of the recipes in there. You don't make them all. There'll be some favourites and some that you never ever use. And the same is true for your genes. So what has it taught us? Well, that scientists can actually work together. They're not well known for their communication skills, a lot of scientists. That they started it and technology improved really, really quickly. Certain genes are located, we know which chromosomes carry which genes, and the idea that some are turned on and some are turned off. So as mentioned, we're now turning our attention to the genomes of different organisms, and that's going to help us develop medicines, develop cures, develop new projects. And remembering with DNA, we do a lot of work with bacteria and DNA that are in plasmids, but we're also looking at bacterial DNA, which is long and loopy and found in its cell. How can the Human Genome Project help us? Well, we're doing a lot of work with genetic diseases. I say that like I am, the scientific community I mean. And diabetes is on the increase. Are there some genetic types that make you more prone to pick up these lifestyle diseases? A lifestyle disease is something that you can change and you can alter. So if you knew early on that you were prone to diabetes, maybe you're going to be a little bit more careful about your health and your lifestyle and never develop it, as opposed to developing type 2 diabetes and then having to undo that damage. Lots of cancers have a genetic cause. We talked about genes being switched on and genes being switched off, and sometimes cancers are caused by changes in switching on and off genes. Also, if they've got a genetic cause and we know about that, then that enables us to fix the cancer with the correct medicine, whether that would be chemotherapy or radiotherapy. If we know the cause of the cancer, we can direct the treatment in a much better way. The Human Genome Project, in fact, just the Genome Project overall, where we're looking at lots of different species, allows us to identify how closely related species are. We don't just look at the external characteristics, we look at their DNA, and from that we're able to come up with a whole new classification system. Why is that important? Well, obviously we want to maintain biodiversity because there's lots of animals out there that are part of food chains and food webs. We want to keep those active and alive because, again, a lot of them are the basis for cures in medicine and in the development of pharmaceuticals. Who would have thought that the willow tree, the bark from the willow tree, would enable us to discover aspirin? Aspirin is still considered a bit of a wonder drug. So we want to keep our biodiversity. So by discovering how closely organisms are related to each other, then that helps us keep a view of that. So can you describe the relationship between a gene, a chromosome and DNA? Can you explain what the Human Genome is and the benefits of the Human Genome Project? Can you explain why the genome matters? Not just the human genome, but the genome of many different species. Can you describe the DNA molecule? What did we learn from the Human Genome Project?